Hi everyone. English is fine? Yeah. Or do I mix the two? Do I English to Okay, so just to give you background, have you heard of the Keenan Ruben murder case? So this is back in 2011. So I'm one of the founder members of India Against Corruption here in Mumbai. And I still remember one night I had Keenan's dad, Valerian Santos, actually come all the way to my house, and he was devastated, and he said, can something be done for our children? Prior to this, I've essentially been a civic activist, would file RTIs, get the roads clean, get the garbage disposed of correctly. That was essentially my area of work, getting a better neighborhood, getting the BMC to work, getting them accountable. But I had never really done anything for women's rights till then. And then when I actually went into what's actually happened in Amboli, so just to recall, there was Amboli Bar and Kitchen right here on Caesar Road. And what happened was you had Keenan, Ruben and a bunch of their friends who were just chilling outside the restaurant after watching a cricket match. And somebody from amongst a group of boys then ended up physically molesting one of their female friends. And they obviously told them off, and they told them to scrap, just get lost. But these guys came back, and they were armed and things like that, and they actually killed both of them. Keenan died on the spot, Ruben died after 2 days. And it was horrifying because we've always heard of such violence in some place in North India or whatever. We never really looked at suburban Bombay, Andheri, in that sense. But that's typically what happened, and you had over 100 people who were watching. Nobody really called the cops. The cops showed up as usual in a very Bollywood way, very late. And you obviously had a family totally devastated, right? You obviously lost 2 boys who were in their prime. And then I realized that this is not just a normal murder, right? The boys went down because they stood up for somebody who was sexually harassing a girl. So had somebody, because why did the person harass the girl to begin with? Because the person thought he could get away with it. And then we did some more research, and this is before Nirbhaya. This is much before Nirbhaya. And we found that there are 2 sections in the Indian Penal Code, 354 and 509. 354 is physical harassment. 509 is essentially verbal or gestures. That is also harassment in a sense. And what we found was both of these were, so 509 was non-cognizable, 354 was cognizable, but it was bailable. So what it actually meant is you could just molest someone, and even if the person takes you to the police station, which in itself is a big thing, you can just pay $1,200 and walk out. And we were appalled. How is this that till date nobody has done anything as regards getting the law changed? We got over 1 lakh signatures. At that point of time, we had the Chief Minister, Mr. Prithviraj Chavan, we had the Home Minister, Mr. R.R. Patil, and Maharashtra became one of the first states to make both these sections, 354 and 509, cognizable and non-bailable, which means that an arrest has to basically happen. This happened even before Nirbhaya. So that was our first foray into trying to do something for women. And I think the best kept secret is that it's very difficult. The impression that people have is it's very difficult to work with the government. I think it's the other way around. There's nobody wanting to work with the government. If anyone goes with something sensible, they'll actually listen to you. That's exactly what we proved. So here we were. We got this law. Then we worked with the Mumbai police. There was Mr. Vishwas Tandre Patil, who was the then additional commissioner of the Western region. There were 21 police stations across Bandra, right up to Jogeshwari and Poi. That is the Western region. And we got 3,000 people into the act. And when I actually spoke with these people, because I interacted with these people, I asked them why did they do what they did. What actually caused them to do that? And all of them were essentially emulating what is the typical toxic male stereotype, which I think all of us has grown up seeing in terms of popular culture. So that's when we realized that, oh, while we were working, and along with this, another thing what we then discovered along the way was, so all of this is discoveries. We started doing research and started solving something. So we asked for a fast track court, and I'm proud to say that the fast track court gave imprisonment for life, not life imprisonment, not the 14 years, imprisonment for life. That means you will be in jail till you die. The harshest punishment ever for those culprits, right, in the Ruben murders. And then we realized that there's something called a Dakshata Samiti. Every police station is supposed to have a Dakshata Samiti. It's the best kept secret. So a Dakshata Samiti was originally envisaged in 1977 by the Morarji Desai government. And what it was meant to do was get the local citizenry to hold the police accountable. That was the idea. You see, the Police Act is essentially a vestige of the British era. It was basically in 1861 that you had this entire mechanism being formulated. So it was coming from what they called the background of the mutiny and what we call the First War of Independence. So there was no belief or there was no trust in the Indians, right? So it started off from that paradigm that there has to be crowd control. So if you see, there is no accountability of the police to the local citizenry. They tried to change that, at least for women. But what is the Dakshata Samiti today? It has basically become a parking lot for the behan and the betis and the other rishtedars of the politicians. That's what it is. And what they're actually supposed to do is hold the police accountable, ask them how many cases were filed. Because if you typically see how you have crime basically measured, is you basically measure incidents of crime. Now many times what happens is you complain, but clearly the police basically says, हाँ इसने कुछ किया, इसको छापड़ मारो. हाँ आप ठीक हो, ये आपको चल जाएगा, okay, रफा दफा. Because they don't want something there. Because the moment it is registered, they have to investigate. They have to take it to its logical conclusion. So this is called working, right? Like let's take the most common example of working. Somebody flicks your phone. You go to the police station and say कि मेरा phone किसने चोरी किया? And they say नहीं, चोरी नहीं हुआ है. वो आपकी लापरवाही के वजह से आपने misplace कर दिया. तो हाँ आपको एक loss certificate देंगे. So this is how they keep crime under control. The same happens even in case of sexual harassment. So what actually happened is sexual harassment. What they actually do is public indecency. 110, 1200. So this is a typical working that happens. Invariably, we understand how we have very entrenched structures of patriarchy, misogyny, and it's very difficult. There's this asymmetry of power. So the idea was to actually get these committees in places. So we are working with the Mumbai police to get this implemented across Maharashtra. And that's when suddenly we realized that okay, we are working on the curative side. There is nothing on the preventive side. So on the preventive side, that's when you had the Justice for Asifa, which had basically happened, and I was completely surprised and aghast that there is a bunch of people supporting the rapists, and even educated people came up with some sort of an explanation to support what had happened there, on the other side. And it's not about political or social or whatever. It was just so ridiculous, and that's when we realized that we need to have some conversations on the preventive aspect. I think what has been happening for the last 1 year, it started off with Raya Sarkar's list originally for academia and the entire Me Too bit. I think it has made all of us realize that we are all part of the problem in some way. And the reason why I say all part of the problem is because all of us need to be conscious of what we say, what we do, where we say that, how do we do it? Because invariably, these are conversations that nobody wants to really have. Secondly, we need to approach the entire issue from a very sex-positive way. That means, so what I'm trying to essentially say is when people think about sex, people, think about it as a dirty act, and hence because they are involved in it, this is chalta hai. My behavior other than sex is something I will pay attention to, but because it is sexual, I will not pay attention to that. My morals in my everyday life are different, and my morals in my sex life are essentially different. And this needs to change. This is this typical Indian hypocrisy that we have, and that will change only when we have conversations. I think the best thing that has happened in the last 1 month is that for the first time, young men across the spectrum are beginning to discuss consent. Here, we don't understand consent. We don't understand how do we even have conversations. We don't even understand what is private space. We don't even understand what is comfort zone. And let's take the state of Maharashtra, guys. Our very own Maharashtra has sex education banned since the last 8 years. It's banned. It's a bad thing. We are not supposed to talk about it. And it happened in the last previous government. It's continued in this government. And I still remember that sex education in school was the only time when you said, okay, this is acceptable behavior, this is not acceptable behavior, you know, you've turned into an adolescent, you turn into an adult, and you know, there are hormonal changes, and you also need to mature and all of that. Now nobody has these conversations with people. If you're not going to have these conversations with people and you're going to leave this education merely on pop culture, what else are you going to get? Right? This entire, and then you have so much of sexism and misogyny which is steeped in our culture. You know, it's everything. You just start from ki ladki ki tarah kyun ro rahe ho. I mean, it's very innocuous now. You would not think about it. I think all of our parents have told all the boys at some point in time, you know, boys don't cry. It's a very standard thing. Or for that matter, कि हमने हाथों में चूड़ियां नहीं पहन रखी हैं. That is sexist. You might not think about it, but it's ingrained in our culture. You know, कि oh, कि अगर हाथ में आपने चूड़ी पहन ली तो आप कुछ कर नहीं पाओ. That is the kind of impression that you have. So there is so much of deeply entrenched patriarchy and misogyny that at all points of time we need to be conscious and mindful about what we are doing and what we are saying. It's not that just because you know someone in some context means that someone would not essentially do something else which is harassment in another context. You know, that's what I've been seeing when it comes to so many people. The least that people can do is at least own up to what they did and essentially say sorry, accept the fact that this happened. And what I find is that there is this defense, there is this typical hegemony, because at the end of the day, what are we seeing? We're essentially, and I link this to what we're seeing at Sabarimala right now. Right? Till 1930s, the Dalits weren't allowed there because the same logic was given. Like, oh, you know, the rituals and etc., the consecration has happened, and if the Dalits basically enter there, you know, the consecration stuff like that would basically not work. And you had one person basically say, no, that's wrong. And then now you have Dalits there. Now, after in the last 70 years, nothing has happened to the Shastras and consecration, so on and so forth. So I think what we need to be really looking at is this constitutional morality. The fact that, you know, women are equal. You know, women are different physically but are equal. We need to look beyond what is bequeathed to us culturally. We need to look beyond what we have powerful forces in where we are, right? Our own families, the way we treat women at home, the way our fathers treat our mothers, the way we treat our sisters, the way we treat our wives. I think it's just so deeply entrenched that one needs to be even more conscious about it. And while we've been seeing, you know, at the other end of the spectrum that, oh, you know, the whole thing makes us a little too uneasy. I think if you even look at the number of abuse of Me Too, which is essentially some people using this movement to settle scores, that is a very tiny fraction of the overall sexual harassment basically going on. So even when we basically made this law, right, so under the law that we've amended here in Maharashtra, and of course now you have post-Nirbhaya Justice Verma Committee report, which was implemented. So you have 354 ABCD, 509 ABCD, and if a woman complains, you will have the arrest immediately. Right? So the point is, we are looking at a problem which is so deep-rooted, which is so ubiquitous. Every woman has been harassed at some point in time. Every woman has had some relationship where people have basically crossed the line. Every woman has basically been in a relationship where you had consensual sexual encounters and you had non-consensual sexual encounters. And then you have social pressure, and then you have various other things piling on you, and it's extremely complex and complicated. You are equal rights, but you still give primacy to women simply because they have been systematically oppressed over a long time. And I think that is the kind of conversation that we need to have. That is the kind of discussions that we need to have across the spectrum, we are working. But our idea essentially was to have the first mass video-based public education system for young adults. It's essentially everybody in college above the age of 18 should have this discussion of what consent is, should have a discussion about what is it, why is it important to respect the woman's space, for women to essentially understand what is crime and what is not crime, how to basically escalate the whole thing for redressal, to make sure that there are Vishakha guideline committees post Bhabri Devi in every college. So we're doing that. And I am reasonably confident that despite being in a state of Maharashtra where we have sex education banned, I am reasonably positive that the Mumbai University will give us permission, and we hope to have this conversation with over 10.5 lakh young people, right? So that's more on the positive aspect of prevention. On the curative part, we are in the process of setting up Dakshata Samitis, which are essentially groups of women who meet once a month with the police, holding the police accountable for crimes related to women. Right now we have only one Dakshata Samiti which is functional, which is in Juhu. We are now moving on to Santa Cruz and a few areas. There are 96 police stations, as you know, across Mumbai, and I'll be more than happy should any of you all want to collaborate or know somebody who would like to collaborate. Thank you so much for having listened to me. I hope I haven't exceeded my name. Thank you so much.
In the world,
Yes.
they are the same, God made man and woman differently or only every which way. It's just that our law system is so shitty and so poor, there is no fear of law. I've lived in the Middle East for 10 years, Dubai. Men get an urge there too. They too want to hold a woman, touch a woman. They dare not. They want to spit on the road there as well. They want to throw the garbage out on the streets. Everything that we do here. But the laws are so strict that even when we go as tourists overseas, we dare not. So we have to somehow create a movement in India where you grab the governments who we bloody vote for and say change the damn law. These laws are archaic. They were made for the British to suit them. If it means change the constitution, frigging change it. It's for us. Why are we scared to bring it up?
Your good name, ma'am?
Ritu.
Ritu, I also happen to be a politician, so we'll have that conversation maybe after this. But if I keep that aside, you asked two very relevant points. Point number one, let's look at crime in Maharashtra. You know, let's say there are 100 cases that are basically filed. Do you know how many of the cases actually are convicted? Let's say 100 rapes or 100 cases as regards to sexual harassment against women. 100 cases have been filed. How many of these 100 cases actually reach conviction where anything is actually convicted? Take a wild guess. Take a wild guess. May not to try. Wild guess. What is the conviction rate for crimes against women in Maharashtra? Take a wild guess. It's NCRB, National Crime Records Bureau data. It is 7%. It is 7%. If you find the person guilty, but you will be able to hang the person only to find the person guilty. So it's the certainty. It's the certainty of the punishment which will ensure a kind of a deterrent. That's one. No, I'm coming to that. Second, I think what you say is correct. If you see our adultery laws, you literally had women being treated as property. I mean, that's it. Look at the way you had systemic misogyny from the Victorian era coming and seeping into us post-independence, right? Courtesy them. So I agree with what you're saying. There is a lot of need for better laws, and I think we have fairly good enough laws, if you ask me, as far as sexual harassment and gender-based violence is concerned. The problem is a little more than that. The problem is, as I say, मैं हिंदी में कहता हूँ कि कपड़ा वही है, दर्जी अलग है. So we all come from the same society. Now, Akshara did a survey recently where they found that 50% of their respondents, and these are police officers, low-ranking police officers, not from the IPS, they come from the constable. 50% of all these officers actually beat their wives. Their wives told them that they didn't. So when you actually go, despite having all the laws with you, you go to a police station, you go to this officer, what part of their character are you basically going to appeal? So it's a deep-rooted social problem. And the only solution to it is to have more conversations. I am proud of the fact that my mother, when when I showed my first sign of mustaches, actually took me aside and actually had this conversation with me and told me, this is what is your behavior, this is what is expected of you, and this is what is not expected of you. I don't think anyone has that conversation with anyone these days. The girls are essentially just, told, okay, these are your don'ts, they don't even have any do's, and the boys essentially, you're not even supposed to have any conversation. So I think it starts from that. It starts from looking at sex in a positive way, as just another facet of life as everything else. And once you normalize that, then you basically say that just as you behave in a normal way for all other things, you are supposed to behave in a normal way in that context too. And then have this discussion. So it's extremely important to have these conversations of consent, of behavior, of personal space, of violations of that, and what can go wrong. So unless and until we're not going to have that discussion in society, nothing is going to happen. And when I say this discussion is a continuous discussion, I mean, it's so sad, and and I'm sorry, this is the 5th time I'm basically done it. It's so exasperating that now it's in court. We have actually filed a case where we are asking. So the government basically says, thanks to whoever runs it from Nagpur these days. Sorry, but I'll be very honest. The weird ideas that they have about conversations about sex. It's suddenly dharm bhrasht ho jayega कि ये this is not our culture, ये हमारी संस्कृति नहीं है, so on and so forth. So unless you're going to revolt against that, unless you're going to have those conversations, nothing else.